From Mark Henry being pushed so far by Shawn Michaels' behavior that he made a shocking threat.
I got in trouble and they sent me to Canada because I threatened to kill Shawn Michaels.
To Chris Candido's friends accusing Shawn of crossing a personal line backstage.
The worst I can think of is the thing with Shawn. Screwing with somebody's wife.
Shawn Michaels stepped on a lot of toes in WWE, and in this video we're breaking down the wrestlers who believed he went too far and wanted him dead. Let's begin with Shane Douglas. Shane Douglas entered the World Wrestling Federation in 1995 with high hopes and tremendous potential. A man who had already proven himself in multiple territories and had earned the respect of his peers through years of hard work and dedication to his craft. He was given the Dean Douglas character, an intellectual, academic persona designed to challenge the top talent in the company and provide a fresh heel that audiences could genuinely despise. His opportunity for greatness arrived at In Your House, Great White North, on October 22, 1995, when Shawn Michaels, the reigning Intercontinental Champion, was scheduled to defend the prestigious title against him. Douglas had worked tirelessly to reach this moment. He had paid his dues, traveled the roads, slept in cheap motels, and sacrificed everything for this shot at glory. But fate, or rather backstage manipulation, had other plans entirely. Days before the event, Michaels was allegedly attacked by Marines in a Syracuse bar. The circumstances surrounding this attack have been debated for decades, with many in the wrestling community questioning whether the injuries were as severe as reported or whether the entire incident was manufactured to protect Michaels from having to lose to Douglas cleanly. The title was conveniently forfeited to Douglas. For approximately 20 glorious minutes, Shane Douglas held the Intercontinental Championship, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. 20 minutes. That was all he got. 20 minutes to savor a dream that had taken a lifetime to achieve. Then, it all came crashing down around him in the most humiliating fashion imaginable. He was immediately booked to lose the title to Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, a Clique member, in an impromptu match that Douglas had absolutely no chance of winning. The match wasn't a fair contest, it was an execution. According to Douglas himself, this was deliberately orchestrated to prevent Michaels from losing cleanly. Belt remained firmly within the Clique's iron grip. The incident effectively terminated Douglas's push in WWF and represented everything fundamentally wrong with the backstage culture that Michaels had helped create and perpetuate for years. Douglas has spoken extensively about a prior confrontation with Michaels in the locker room that established the foundation for his subsequent burial. According to his detailed account, Michaels threatened to embarrass him on television, and Douglas responded defiantly by stating he would stretch his rear end, leading to the match finish being altered as punishment for his insubordination. In subsequent interviews spanning over a decade, Douglas has described Michaels as afraid of his own shadow and claimed he fundamentally lacked the courage and integrity to resolve disputes like a professional. The bitterness in Douglas's voice when discussing Michaels remains palpable and unmistakable even decades later. A wound that time has utterly failed to heal, a grudge that has only intensified with each passing year, as Douglas has watched Michaels receive accolades and praise while his own career was derailed by one man's petty vindictiveness. And if Shane Douglas learned how power worked the hard way, Bret Hart learned it on the biggest stage imaginable. Bret, the Hitman Hart. No conflict in professional wrestling history encapsulates the toxic environment of 1990s WWF more completely than the legendary war between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Their rivalry began as professional competition between two supremely talented athletes, but it devolved into genuine hatred that would require over a decade to resolve, if it ever truly was resolved at all. The competition intensified dramatically as both men transitioned to singles careers and began competing for the same coveted spot at the top of the card. WrestleMania 2000 in March 1996 represented a turning point. Hart and Michaels competed in a 60-minute Iron Man match that pushed both men to their absolute physical and mental limits. The match ended in a scoreless draw. Overtime was added, and Michaels won the WWF Championship with sweet chin music after 61 grueling minutes. But Hart took serious issue with what happened next. After winning, Michaels told Hart to "get the hell out of my ring," an ad-lib that Hart considered deeply disrespectful given that he had agreed to lose cleanly and had given absolutely everything he had for over an hour. For Hart, this moment symbolized everything fundamentally wrong with Michaels: the complete inability to win graciously, the pathological need to humiliate opponents even in victory, the utter disregard for professional courtesy. By 1997, the rivalry had turned intensely personal. On the May 19th episode of Raw, Michaels cut a promo containing the phrase "sunny days," a reference that implied Hart was having an affair with Tammy Sunny Sitch. Hart, who was experiencing real marital difficulties at the time, considered the comment absolutely unforgivable. The confrontation turned physical on June 9, 1997, in Hartford, Connecticut. Hart attacked Michaels backstage with a ferocity that shocked witnesses, pulling out clumps of hair and attempting to inflict genuine damage. Multiple wrestlers and officials were required to separate them. In a legendary 1997 promo that still resonates with wrestling fans today, Hart addressed Michaels directly and expressed his contempt in terms that remain absolutely shocking for their raw intensity.
You know, there was a time when I just couldn't stand you. But now when I look at you, I realize that I hate your guts. And the reason that I hate your guts, to list all the reasons why I can't stand you and you make me sick.
Hart continued his verbal assault, connecting Michaels' character to what he perceived as broader cultural decline.
And it finally hit me. That's what you Americans all symbolize. You think you're better than everybody else. You think you can cop this attitude and look down at the rest of the world like you're better than us. Well, it's not true. It's not true at all. Because you're rotten through and through, all the way through to your insides.
Hart's accusations extended to Michaels' lifestyle and what he represented as WWF champion.
Instead, you were too busy posing for girly magazines. Dancing around, kissing all the girls. Putting tattoos on yourself and earrings through your navel and your nose and your ears. Shaking your ass and making yourself a horse's. A self-professed degenerate, that's what you are. A self-professed degenerate.
The culmination of their bitter war came at Survivor Series on November 9, 1997, the infamous Montreal Screwjob that remains the most controversial moment in wrestling history. During the match, Michaels applied Hart's own sharpshooter submission hold, and referee Earl Hebner rang the bell prematurely, awarding Michaels the title without an actual submission. According to ESPN, Michaels initially denied any knowledge of the plan. Years later, he acknowledged his involvement, admitting it was the worst day of his career. It took 13 years for Hart and Michaels to reconcile, finally doing so on WWE Raw in January 2010. But while Bret fought Shawn in public, there was one man backstage who watched it all and quietly kept score: The Undertaker. The Undertaker represented the counterbalance to the Kliq's reign of terror throughout the 1990s. As locker room enforcer and leader of the Bone Street Crew, Undertaker maintained order and ensured wrestlers fulfilled their booking obligations regardless of personal preferences or political alliances. His relationship with Michaels during this turbulent period was characterized by professional respect coupled with intense personal disdain. Undertaker later admitted in interviews that in the early years, if he had seen Michaels on fire backstage, he wouldn't on him to put that out. The imagery speaks volumes about the depth of contempt that existed between these two legendary performers. This simmering tension reached its boiling point at WrestleMania 14 in 1998, an event that would define the future direction of WWF. Michaels was scheduled to drop the WWF Championship to Stone Cold Steve Austin, signaling the transition from the New Generation era to the Revolutionary Attitude era. Given Michaels' well-documented history of refusing to lose titles cleanly and the still fresh memory of the Montreal Screwjob just months earlier, Undertaker took extraordinary precautions that underscored just how little trust existed in that locker room. According to reports, Undertaker taped his fists and waited backstage, fully prepared to confront Michaels physically if he refused to do business. Michaels complied with the finish, but the incident demonstrated the extraordinary level of distrust he had generated among his peers through years of political maneuvering and selfish behavior. And for some wrestlers, Michaels didn't just damage careers, he crossed lines you don't come back from. Candido and Shane Douglas. Chris Candido grew up completely immersed in the wrestling business from the moment he could walk. His grandfather, Popeye, Chuck Richards, worked for WWF, exposing young Chris to the industry's unique culture and brutal demands. Candido began training at the tender age of 14 and debuted professionally in 1986 while still a teenager. He possessed legitimate technical wrestling ability that earned respect across multiple promotions, but Candido's personal life became inextricably intertwined with Tammy Sitch, who would achieve legendary fame in WWF as Sunny, the first diva of the Attitude Era. They met in high school and began dating, their relationship spanning from approximately 1990 until Candido's tragic death in 2005. In WWF, Candido worked as Skip of the Body Donnas, with Sunny serving as their charismatic valet. Behind the scenes, however, his world was falling apart. Sunny had reportedly begun an affair with Shawn Michaels that would devastate Candido emotionally and professionally. According to reports, the affair lasted approximately 9 months and included vacations together, while Candido remained devoted to a woman who was betraying him with one of the company's top stars. Shane Douglas, who traveled extensively with Candido and Sunny during this turbulent period, has confirmed the affair's existence in multiple interviews. In a recent interview, Douglas was asked about uncomfortable moments involving Sunny. His response was direct and absolutely damning.
I do also know that Chris was head over heels in love with her. You know, even when he knew that kind of stuff, like the stuff with Shawn Michaels at WWF. I was there that night, and it did happen. You know, and
Douglas elaborated on Candido's tragic inability to leave the relationship despite the repeated betrayals.
You know, to me, I'd be saying kick your ass to the curb. But, you know, Chris really did love her. And there was an odd relationship between them, because I think most people put in that situation, having that kind of stuff done to them, would say, "F this, I'm out of here." But the two of them were, I think, well, first of all, they were codependent, and that's always a bad thing. But they had both come up in the business and cut their teeth pretty much in the same places, and had known each other for quite a long time before that.
When asked about the worst behavior he witnessed from the Clique toward Candido, Douglas did not hesitate.
The worst I can think of is the thing with Shawn. Screwing with somebody's wife or very close girlfriend, or even if she wants to, that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is you would never in a million years have to worry about if you and I were on the road together doing something like that. And I would hope the same thing vice versa. So I think there's some things that I don't care, you know, what your position is in the company, what stroke you have with the boss. There's things that you do and there's things that you don't do. And that was just a goddamn move.
Jim Ross has stated on his podcast that the Clique tormented Candido, using their power to pile humiliation on top of betrayal. Candido remained with Sunny despite everything, unable to break free from a relationship that was destroying him. The relationship continued until Candido's death on April 28, 2005, from acute pneumonia following surgery. He was 33 years old. Not everyone stayed silent, and one man decided he wasn't going to be intimidated at all. Bam Bigelow. Standing up to the Clique. Bam Bigelow was one of the few wrestlers who refused to bow down to the Clique's intimidation tactics. In a candid interview, Bigelow detailed his experiences with the group and their influence over Vince McMahon.
Even though they abused me in the end, but I think that was the influence of the Clique trying to bury me, because there was some problems with my friend Chris Candido, and some rumors that I didn't like, and some things.
Bigelow described the Clique's disrespectful behavior toward veteran wrestlers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You know, Shawn would go up to him and tell him, "You suck. You're no good." You know.
Yeah.
You know, and the twins, the two brothers. You know.
Yeah.
They had him by the throat in the garden, choked him out.
The Bruise Brothers.
Bruise Brothers, man.
Yeah.
You know, and Shawn getting his kicked in Syracuse. What? These guys is a jerk, man.
Yeah.
When asked if there were ever major confrontations, Bigelow didn't mince words.
They would have got their ass kicked. So I'd have beat the shit out of all three of them. And at one time, they all wanted to jump me, and it was like, "All right, you go first." You know, because the bottom line, I'd kick all three of their ass. I mean, if they want to really get down, they want to shoot, they'd be in big fucking trouble.
Bigelow also revealed that Vince McMahon refused to acknowledge the Clique's existence when confronted.
Did you ever go to Vince during any of this?
Yeah, I did, and Vince said, "No, there's no Clique." Vince refused to acknowledge it at all.
Yeah.
Which right there led me to believe that it was time to get out. and that they were definitely influencing him. And
Despite his personal animosity, Bigelow acknowledged Michaels' in-ring abilities while criticizing his character.
Shawn Michaels, well, you know, he's a great worker. He's just got a bad attitude and a bad way that he does business, but he's been successful and he's got rich doing it, and more power to him.
Years later, a new generation would walk into that same locker room and realize nothing had really changed. Shane Helms, the Hurricane's Fury. Shane Helms, better known to wrestling fans around the world as the Hurricane, had been a lifelong admirer of Shawn Michaels' in-ring work. Like so many wrestlers of his generation, Helms had grown up watching Michaels perform and had studied his matches, his mannerisms, his ability to captivate an audience with every gesture and every movement. Meeting his hero, however, proved to be one of the most disappointing and disillusioning experiences of his entire career. Helms has stated publicly that Shawn was a big disappointment for me to meet as a person, a sentiment that echoes throughout countless testimonials from wrestlers who encountered Michaels during his peak years of influence and arrogance. What made the disappointment particularly bitter was the contrast between the performer Helms had idolized and the person he actually encountered in the locker room. One particularly telling incident occurred at Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in professional wrestling, a building that carries decades of history and tradition. Helms was performing a chokeslam, called a goozle, backstage in the opening match of the evening. As it happened, Michaels was working Kane in the main event that night, and Kane's finishing move was, of course, the chokeslam. Rather than approaching Helms professionally and respectfully about using the move, the way any colleague with basic human decency would handle such a situation, Michaels publicly buried him in front of the entire locker room. He humiliated Helms in front of his peers, in front of the very people Helms had to work with every single day. The following week, agents informed Helms he could no longer perform the chokeslam, a move that Vince McMahon himself had personally instructed him to use. But here's what makes the story even more telling about Michaels' true character. When Helms publicly criticized Michaels in later interviews, his phone blew up with guys in the business thanking me. Wrestlers from every era, from every promotion, reached out to express their gratitude that someone had finally spoken the truth about what Michaels was really like behind the curtain, and most tellingly of all, not one single person came to Michaels' defense or claimed that Helms was lying. Not one of Michaels' supposed friends, not one Clique member, not one person willing to stand up and say that the accusations were false. The silence was absolutely deafening, and it spoke volumes about the truth of everything Helms had said. And if Shawn could humiliate mid-card talent, imagine how he treated someone he saw as a real threat. The Rock. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson entered WWF in 1996 after a brief football career that didn't pan out as he had hoped. He debuted as Rocky Maivia, a name that paid homage to his father Rocky Johnson and grandfather Peter Maivia, both legendary figures in the wrestling world whose legacies cast long shadows over the young man trying to forge his own path. The initial reception from fans was hostile and unforgiving, with audiences rejecting the character as too squeaky clean and manufactured for the increasingly edgy product WWF was becoming. Johnson adapted brilliantly to the criticism, turning heel and eventually becoming one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, a man who would transcend the industry entirely and become one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. But before his meteoric rise to superstardom, before the catchphrases and the movie deals and the millions upon millions of fans, Johnson experienced Michaels' particular version of locker room politics firsthand. According to multiple reports, tensions between Rock and Michaels dated back to the 1980s, when Michaels allegedly disrespected Rock's grandmother, Leah Maivia, while working in her Hawaiian promotion. The slight was never forgotten by the Johnson family, a reminder that in wrestling, grudges can span generations, and debts are always remembered even when they cannot be immediately collected. As a rookie in 1996 and 1997, Rock faced systematic backstage bullying from Michaels and Triple H, including harsh criticism over his use of certain moves and his overall wrestling style. Bret Hart noted that Michaels and Triple H actively attempted to bury Rock's career, using their considerable backstage influence to undermine his push and prevent him from reaching his full potential. They saw the young man's charisma and talent and recognized him as a threat to their positions at the top of the card. Rock persevered through sheer talent and determination, eventually becoming far too popular and far too valuable to the company to suppress any longer. WWE attempted to book a dream match between Rock and Michaels on multiple occasions over the years, including proposed WrestleMania WrestleMania encounters in 2004 and 2006 that would have generated absolutely massive buy rates and been discussed for generations. Rock refused each time, and the reason stemmed directly from the treatment he received as a young wrestler struggling to find his footing. The dream match never happened, a dream that fans worldwide begged for, that promoters would have paid fortunes to see, that could have been one of the greatest encounters in wrestling history. All of it denied because Shawn Michaels couldn't resist hazing a rookie years earlier, couldn't resist asserting his dominance over a young man just trying to make it in the business. The consequences of cruelty, it turns out, can echo for decades. Even size didn't matter, because power in that locker room wasn't physical. Mark Henry. Mark Henry joined WWE in 1996 as the world's strongest man, bringing legitimate athletic credentials that should have commanded respect from anyone with basic intelligence. Henry was a powerlifting and weightlifting champion who could legitimately destroy anyone in that locker room in an actual physical confrontation. Despite his imposing physical presence, Henry experienced Michaels' pranks and hazing directly, proof that the Clique's arrogance knew absolutely no bounds. According to Cageside Seats, Michaels and other Clique members hid Henry's crutches while he was recovering from an injury, leaving him stranded and humiliated. Picture the scene: one of the strongest human beings on the planet, temporarily disabled by injury, unable to move around the locker room because a group of bullies thought it would be funny to hide his mobility aids. The cruelty was calculated, the humiliation intentional. Frustrated beyond endurance, Henry threatened to kill Michaels if the behavior continued, and given Henry's legitimate strength, the threat was taken deadly seriously. This was not an idle boast from a man playing a character. This was the world's strongest man declaring that he had reached his absolute limit with the disrespect and abuse. Michaels' response demonstrated the Clique's modus operandi perfectly. Rather than acknowledge wrongdoing or apologize for behavior that any reasonable person would recognize as cruel and inappropriate, he reported the threat to Vince McMahon. The result was Henry being sent to Calgary for 9 months of additional training under Stu Hart, effectively exile from television and main roster opportunities while he was supposed to be recovering from injury. The victim became the punished party while the perpetrator faced no consequences whatsoever. This pattern repeated itself throughout the 1990s with remarkable and depressing consistency. Men on a Mission's Forgotten Casualty MO. From Men on a Mission represents one of the most overlooked casualties of the Clique's reign of terror, a man whose story deserves to be told, even though it rarely receives the attention given to more prominent victims. M.O. faced treatment from Michaels and the Clique that derailed his career entirely and left him financially devastated during what should have been his prime earning years. According to his account shared in multiple interviews, an unspecified incident with Michaels led to his termination, and 9 months without bookings or pay while still under contract. Financial devastation for a working wrestler, trying to support himself and his family. 9 months without income. 9 months of watching other wrestlers work while he sat at home. His career effectively frozen because he had crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. The details of the original incident remain somewhat obscured by time, but the consequences were crystal clear. M.O.'s push was terminated. His opportunities evaporated. His income disappeared. And through it all, he was still bound by his contract, unable to work elsewhere to provide for himself. M.O. has stated publicly that if Michaels' born-again Christian status means anything about making amends, he is still waiting for an apology that has never come. The silence speaks volumes about the sincerity of Michaels' supposed transformation. It's easy to find God and claim redemption when you never have to face the people you hurt. It's easy to be forgiven when you never actually ask for forgiveness from those who suffered at your hands. M.O.'s story represents countless others whose careers were quietly destroyed by the Clique's political maneuvering, wrestlers whose names you'll never hear chanted by crowds because they never got the opportunity to show what they could do. Ken Anderson. Ken Anderson, known as Mr. Kennedy in WWE, received advice that demonstrated how the Clique's influence extended far beyond its official peak years, proof that the political structures Michaels helped create continued to affect careers and livelihoods well into the 2000s. According to reports, Stone Cold Steve Austin told Anderson in 2008 to leave WWE entirely due to heat from Michaels, Triple H, and John Cena. Let that sink in. Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the biggest stars in wrestling history, a man who understood understood the business better than almost anyone alive, looked at the political landscape of WWE and concluded that Ken Anderson's best option was simply to leave. Anderson was a talented performer with undeniable charisma and a distinctive style that connected with audiences. He had the look, the promo skills, and the in-ring ability to be a major star. But none of that mattered when you were on the wrong side of the power structure that Michaels had helped create, and that continued to operate according to the same principles decades later. The Clique's influence had become institutionalized. The names at the top may have changed. Michaels eventually gave way to Triple H's dominance, and new favorites emerged, but the game remained fundamentally the same. Certain people were protected regardless of their drawing power or talent. Others were marginalized regardless of their potential, and those who complained or pushed back found themselves advised by legends like Austin to simply get out while they still could. Anderson eventually left WWE, his potential unrealized within that company. He found success elsewhere, but the dream of being a top WWE star was denied. Another casualty of a political system that valued loyalty and connections over talent and drawing power. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.